Hi there. This is a quick message from Munro Partners that this podcast is general financial advice only, meaning it is not specific to you, your needs, goals, or objectives. We suggest you don't act on this information until you've spoken to your professional financial advisor. You'll find our full disclaimer linked to our financial services guide and website in the show notes below.
Hello and welcome to Invest in the Journey. This International Women's Day, we wanted to shine a light on some of the women in the office who our audience might not know so well, but are critical to the essence and the success of Munro. So with that, I'm going to be handing over the mic to someone I work very closely with, Annmarie Nocera, who is our communications designer. Take it from here.
Thanks, Taylor. As mentioned, my name is Annmarie and I'm the communications designer here at Munro. While you might not have heard my voice on the podcast before, I've been closely involved behind the scenes. As part of my role, I help shape and produce each episode, from developing concepts and writing episode copy through to editing and distributing each conversation. So it's a pleasure to step in front of the mic for this International Women's Day episode and host today's discussion. This year, I'm joined by three of my colleagues, Nicky, Jean and Sophia. Welcome, everyone.
Thanks, Annmarie. Thank you.
Just to give our listeners a bit of context, Nicky and Jean are both investment analysts here at Munro, and Sophia recently joined the team as our junior trader. Across the investment team, they all bring different perspectives, different experiences, and their insight into what it's like to be building a career in funds management today. So let's get into it. Nicky, I'll start with you. When you think back to your younger self, maybe at university or even earlier, is this where you imagine you'd end up? And looking back now, what surprised you the most about the path that brought you here?
Yeah, so this was definitely not where I expected to end up. So I did the classic Melbourne Uni degree of finance and accounting, and I honestly thought I'd end up at the Big Four, as most people do. But during uni, some of my peers started investing in the stock market, and that's when I opened my little Westpac account and started investing in some of those small Aussie stocks. And then from there, my interest really just grew. So yeah, didn't expect to be in this industry. And then when I did start a role within the industry, I think I was just so surprised by how many different companies are out there in the market. Like whenever I start researching about an industry, I feel like I've understood it, but then you realise that you only have just scratched the surface because there's just so many different interesting companies that you can continue to uncover. And I think especially at Munro, we get to look at the companies that are growing. So we're not just looking at any odd company, we're looking for growth companies that really are going to benefit from a structural change. And that's what I love about the job.
Sophia, over to you next. You're relatively new to the Munro team and you're in a role that people might not be too familiar with, which is the junior trader position. Can you explain the purpose of your role and trading within a business like Munro?
Yeah, and it's a good question because, to be completely honest, I didn't really know what to expect when I started on the buy side about a month ago. So ultimately, we're working with the portfolio managers to make sure that the position sizes are all consistent with their views. But I think if you break it down a little bit more, you have the analysts who are focused on the fundamentals of the stock. So if you think revenue, gross margins, obviously a lot more to that as well. But then as traders, we look at the underlying market thematics and maybe some of the reasons behind the velocity of the moves as well. Then also sticking in the equity space, we also keep an eye and keep in close contact with the sell side. So that's for any big blocks of stock that might be coming to market in our cares list, or also any IPOs in our area of interests or AOIs. So that's the equity space. Outside of that, we do also pay close attention to some of the global macroeconomic developments. So one of the big areas in this is the interest rate policies from the likes of the RBA and the Fed. So that helps us determine our currency hedging. And that's particularly important for a fund like Munro, who we don't really play in the domestic market. So looking at currencies and how that all feeds back is really important. And then just the final thing that I think I'll speak to quickly is the risk analytics. So we also monitor global volatility markets, bond markets and equity markets. And that's just identifying where the portfolio is exposed to certain risks, and then also to that, whether there's an appropriate hedge that can be used to mitigate those risks. So yeah, overall, quite a bit to the role really.
Definitely a lot to the role. It's very different from my role. I can tell you that for free. Jean, you've been in your role the longest. What are some of your favourite parts about being an investment analyst, and what are some of the things you find the most rewarding?
Yeah, good question. One of the reasons why I enjoy working as an investment analyst is because, as an analyst, we're all essentially, I guess, paid to learn. So, 1 week I might be deep diving into the supply chain of an AI-powered distribution system, or juxtaposing strengths and weaknesses of a GPU versus a custom chip. And then the next I might be, sizing the total addressable market of a global obesity market for GLP-1s. And so the only constant is change in the market. So we're always, reading, learning, consulting analysts and industry experts to get to the bottom of, where these structural changes are happening in the market, how these companies are positioned in them. And we're almost on a constant investigative hunt to find a company where the value has yet to be discovered, or, it's been a bit overlooked, misunderstood by the market. And so, yeah, that's one of the things I find really interesting. And maybe another thing is the breadth of access to information, and even to, I guess, corporates at times. While we are just analysts, we often get the opportunity to sit across the table from C-suite executives of companies that we're doing work on, and maybe even challenge their assumptions and strategies a little at times. On my recent trip to San Francisco for the healthcare conference, I got to sit down with the CEO and CFO of Galderma, a leading dermatology and skincare company based in Switzerland, to chat about their outlook for 2026 and beyond. And at the end, maybe even sneak in a selfie as well, which was really fun. And one of the things I find the most rewarding about working as an analyst is how empowered, I guess, we each feel when we get to form our own views that influence a decision which ultimately turns out to be the right one, especially when it's one that differs from the consensus or popular view at the time. Often it takes a lot of work and time to build conviction around a stock, and over the investment journey, you will come across times when stocks get triggered, i.e. when they pull back 20% from their peak price or from cost. And as an analyst, you work with the portfolio manager to decide whether you want to defend it or honor the trigger and sell it. For instance, Google was a position that experienced a lot of overhangs in 2024 and first half 25 with the DOJ trial and AI posing risks of disintermediation. But the work we did and our math told us to stay convicted, which was a hard view to hold at the time because the stock was underperforming. However, our decision to stay the course turned out to be the right one, and the stock subsequently put up 65% after that. So, it's moments like this when we decide to stay convicted, when it's hard to hold our view, and it turns out being the right call that I find most rewarding.
Yeah, wow, that does sound incredibly rewarding. I think the nature of working in global growth equities is quite rewarding as it is, and it does keep the day really exciting, and, you never know what's to come. And so I'd love to zoom out for a moment. International Women's Day is often about celebrating achievement, but growth usually comes through challenge. Could each of you share a moment that really tested you and what you took away from it?
So I think personally for me, I didn't really come into the industry with a technical financial background. So I was broadly familiar with all the concepts, and I did study commerce at uni, but I didn't major in finance. So I think my first role was in more business strategy, working with one of the CEO at my previous firm. So then to dive into one of the financial divisions did really seem like I was quite over my head. So I think in terms of what I took away for it, for me, it was really just finding a really good support network and not being afraid to ask questions and acknowledge that you weren't supposed to really know all the answers. And to be completely frank, I think I still struggle with trying to remind myself that quite frequently. But I think ultimately it was really finding a good support system and network and finding people who are really willing to invest in you as well. And it really does kind of build up your self-confidence a little bit, and it does just progress. So I think also just kind of like rounding that out a little bit, it also boils down to just not being afraid to take a risk and a chance, even if at the time you might not completely know what you're in for.
Nicky, maybe over to you.
Sure. I mean, when you said the word challenge, the first thing I thought about was CFA. So last year I completed level 3 of the CFA, and that was a really challenging period, mainly because there's just so much that you need to juggle when you do the CFA. So not only are you going through full-time work and balancing personal life, but in order to pass one of the CFA exams, you need to do at least 300 hours of work. And so during that time, it felt like I literally had no life outside of work and CFA. But what I took out of it, similar to Sophia, was that when you have a good support network, it really, really does help. But in addition to that, I think one of the things that I'm really grateful for, and the thing that I sort of proved to myself, was that I could do it if I set my heart to it. And just knowing that when you set your heart to something, you can achieve it if you genuinely believe in the outcome. So that's something I'm really proud of. And for CFA as well, a lot of the stuff that you learnt can be used on the job, which I thought was really useful.
Yes, you should be so proud of yourself. The CFA is such a massive achievement.
And you really do have to make a sacrifice with your personal life. So I think it's really, I was inspired.
I remember when I first started in the industry, it was like the female mentor who basically said to me, you should do your CFA whilst you're young. And so that's why I did it. And I'm still like really grateful that she told me to do it.
And what about you, Jean?
For me, I think one of the things I find challenging when I first started as an analyst is to not let the temporary volatility of the market and short-term basis points of a position affect me too much, especially during times like, the Liberation Day period in March 2025. It was an exceptionally volatile period in the market. There was so much uncertainty we had to unpack and navigate as a fund. But a valuable lesson I learned over the years is to let our fundamental analysis and research speak for itself. While it's important to continuously reflect on our investment thesis, it's equally important to stay the course when the market gets noisy with doomsday narratives going around. So as shown in the Google example I gave earlier, it does pay off to stay the course and hold a view.
Well, thank you all for sharing. I really can see the resilience in the office each and every day in everything you guys do. So Sophia, you've just made the jump from sell side to buy side of the industry, which is a big shift. What has the transition been like for you, and what drew you to the buy side? What have you found are the biggest differences?
Yeah, so I think there definitely are some obvious differences, but having had the experience on the sell side has definitely made my move over a lot easier. I do think it's a little tricky for me to compare exactly, just because it is a little like comparing apples with oranges. So I moved over to Munro, where we're obviously an all-cap international equities fund, from a small to mid-cap Australian equities-focused firm. So there are obviously the clear differences in terms of the stocks themselves and the liquidity levels, but I think the biggest difference for me was actually the reaction time. So for me on the sell side, it was very reactionary. So you see a big news headline and you want to be the first one to get it in front of a client, but not only do you need to relay the information, but you also need to have a view, and then on top of that, it needs to be a nuanced view to be able to cut through from the rest of the street. So this compares to a little bit at Munro, and mind you, I have only been here for a month, so maybe ask me at the next International Women's Day and I'll have a completely different answer. But I do think a big part of it is avoiding trying to be particularly reactionary. So I think this goes to kind of what Jean was saying before as well. And obviously that's within reason. But sticking to the long-term thesis and the AOIs, which the investment team have solid conviction in and have done their very thorough research, is really important. So yeah, I think you do get a little bit more time to kind of process everything. And I think as well that's even more so emphasised by being in Australia and having that focus on the international fund. So obviously we've developed really good sell-side connections in the US to help for any unexpected market moves and can be contacted if need be. But I do think avoiding the temptation to move with the market in the very short term, it can be played to our advantage. Being a little bit more internally focused as well and having that really strong conviction, I think, is something that definitely drew me to the buy side.
And so, Jean, as young professionals in funds management, we've got resources at our fingertips like never before. Is there a medium that you enjoy to help you with your work? For example, a podcast, a website, or maybe even an influencer?
Yeah, as analysts, a big thing we pay attention to are catalysts, which include quarterly earnings, capital markets day, or investor days where companies give mid to long-term guidances, as well as presentations at conferences. So to keep on top of all of them and be able to listen to earnings calls on demand, an app that all the analysts and PMs on the team find very helpful is called Quarter. I like to describe it as a Spotify for earnings calls and all things corporate.
They definitely have some of the best design I've seen in the industry as well.
For sure. And so this year we even upgraded to their AI offering called Quarter Pro. This is not a plug by any means, which is an incredibly powerful tool that accelerates a lot of the research that we do as analysts. So I think that one's a really helpful one. And one of the podcasts that I really enjoy listening to is one called Acquired, hosted by former venture capitalists Ben Gilbert and David Rosenthal. They describe themselves as corporate historians. It's essentially a business podcast that breaks down some of the largest companies in the world, down to how they operate, what the management teams are like, what their secret sauce behind their success is. But they do it in such an interesting storytelling way that keeps it, both educational and interesting. So it's great. I'd recommend it.
Well, I'm convinced. I'm definitely going to be listening to Acquired on my walk home tonight. And so finally, I guess let's just talk about life outside of the office. Nicky, what keeps you grounded or inspired when you're not working, and how important is that space away from work in helping you perform at your best?
Thanks for the question. I think having that space outside of work is critical to perform our best in our role. Obviously, at times it can be a really stressful role. So some of the things that I really enjoy doing include Reformer Pilates. So when how good is it? When I'm doing Reformer Pilates, I can really just concentrate on certain muscle groups and not think about work. So that's one of the key ones. I think another one is running. All of us have run together.
Yeah, I feel like we've found a really shared passion in running, which has been so amazing on our lunch breaks and after work.
Totally, because everyone understands the importance of sort of switching off and ensuring that we get a workout in order to perform at our best. So that's something else. And then maybe just outside of that as well, I love cooking, I love baking. So trying new recipes is always really fun as well.
It's like we're the same person. What a great group of women we have here at Munro, not only in this room, but, extended to the whole office. I truly feel so lucky to work with such inspiring and bright young professionals like yourselves. I hope this conversation offers perspective, encouragement, and a sense of possibility for anyone navigating their own path in our industry. So thanks, everyone.
Thanks so
Thanks for
much.
having us.